Welcome to this explainer. If you've been watching the best product teams out there lately, you've probably noticed a massive, quiet shift happening behind the scenes. They are literally tossing the traditional timeline-heavy Gantt charts in the trash. So today, we're going to break down exactly why that's happening and how you can replace that outdated chart with something way more powerful, an outcome-based roadmap. Let's get right into it.
Picture this incredibly common scenario. You and your team spent all of January perfectly crafting a beautiful, detailed roadmap. Every department is completely aligned. The executives are absolutely thrilled. But then, what happens when Q2 actually arrives?
Yeah, it's that universal dread we all know too well. You look at that colorful chart, and reality just hits you like a ton of bricks. Half the list has slipped past its deadline. But honestly, here's the worst part. Nobody can even confidently say if the half you did manage to ship actually mattered to the business. Traditional roadmaps are basically just glorified feature lists with quarters tacked onto them. Everyone loves them on day one, but that love totally evaporates the second reality sets in. Which brings us to Section 1, the fatal feature flaw. So why do smart teams keep falling into this exact same trap? Well, it boils down to what you're optimizing for. Traditional feature roadmaps optimize strictly for delivery, which, for the sake of this explainer, is our main villain. A feature roadmap really only asks two questions. What are we building, and when is it going to be done? It completely ignores the real hero of modern product development, optimizing for impact. A delivery-focused plan tells you absolutely nothing about why you're building a feature or what's actually supposed to change for the user if your brilliant idea actually works. And that leads us straight into the Gantt chart trap. First off, because it only measures output, it naturally rewards shipping things over actually learning. If your users want a faster commute and you're just taking feature requests, you end up building a faster horse instead of stepping back and inventing the car. Secondly, the second you slap a timeline across the top of your plan, you're forced to put a date on everything. That quietly morphs your experimental bets into hard promises. And finally, because you've made a promise tied to a rigid deadline, you end up totally ignoring evidence that tells you to pivot. You literally just keep building a bad idea so you can hit an arbitrary date on a chart. Moving on to Section 2. Outcomes over outputs. To break free from this trap, the smartest teams are making a massive structural shift. Building an outcome-based roadmap means you are swapping out the core unit of your planning. You're not planning around features or widgets anymore. Nope. The new unit of planning is the actual change you want to create in the world. We absolutely have to stop obsessing over outputs and start focusing on what those outputs are actually meant to achieve. Let's ground this with a concrete example from our source material. An output is just a feature, right? But an outcome is a measurable shift, like lifting user activation from 28% to 40%. That is a highly specific, measurable goal that gives your team a crystal clear target. But crucially, it doesn't dictate exactly how they have to get there. Think of any specific feature as a Trojan horse. Consider the difference between ship the onboarding wizard versus lift activation. The wizard is just one hypothesis for how to hit your goal. What if you start coding that wizard, and early user testing suddenly shows that a dead simple static setup checklist works way better? If your entire focus is the outcome, lifting activation, you can just seamlessly swap the bet. You ditch the wizard, you build the checklist, and you do it without having to completely scrap and reapprove your entire roadmap. The experts over at Product Plan really hit the nail on the head with this quote. Goals change far less often than features. When you build your roadmap around outcomes, it instantly becomes so much more stable. But more importantly, it becomes a much more honest reflection of what your team actually knows, rather than just projecting this false certainty about what specific button is going to be the magic fix 6 months down the line. All right, Section 3. Now, next, and later. Now, you might be wondering, how do we actually organize our priorities if we don't have a timeline? Well, the most practical replacement is a framework called Now, Next, and Later. It's hands down the simplest way to ditch calendar dates. Instead of a strict timeline, you use 3 buckets of confidence. Now is the outcome you are actively pursuing right this minute with a live bet. Next is what you plan to tackle once you've learned a bit more from your current work. And later is really just a direction. It's a horizon to aim for, definitely not a hard commitment. Let me tell you, ripping time off the top of the roadmap is incredibly liberating. It completely kills the false precision that constantly plagues traditional planning. You know exactly what I'm talking about. It stops those product reviews from turning into totally unproductive status updates meetings where everyone's just arguing about why something is 2 weeks late instead of analyzing if it's actually the right thing to be building in the first place. Which brings us to Section 4, a living decision system. The deeper philosophical shift happening in 2026 is treating the roadmap as a living, breathing decision system. A modern roadmap actually functions on a specific formula. Bet on outcome Y with these assumptions, reviewed at date Z. See the difference? Your roadmap is no longer a static to-do list. It's a dynamic system of structured, scientific bets. In this living decision system, every single item you put on your roadmap absolutely must carry 3 vital pieces of context right alongside the outcome bet. First up, evidence. Why are we choosing this specific outcome? Second, the assumption. What must be true for this bet to actually work? And third, the metric. How will we definitively know if it succeeded? You're no longer just pitching a shiny new feature. You are presenting a fully baked, testable hypothesis. And that leads us to Section 5, defending your outcomes. This is exactly where a lot of teams hit a massive wall. They enthusiastically declare an outcome, but they completely lack the evidence to prove it's actually the right one to chase. To solve this, our source material highlights an incredible framework called the Living Product Graph, powered by an AI-native tool called Specky. It closes that evidence gap in 3 simple steps. Step 1, you gather all your scattered signals. We're talking user interviews, support tickets, sales calls, analytics. Step 2, you trace your roadmap outcomes directly back to those justifying signals so you always know exactly why you're doing the work. And step 3, you link every single bet to the ongoing experiments and decisions testing it. And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate goal of retiring the Gantt chart in the first place, creating a fully auditable chain from evidence to outcome. By connecting all these dots, your roadmap transforms from a super fragile wish list into a highly defensible, data-backed workflow. You can walk into a room and show your stakeholders exactly why a decision was made, complete with the hard data that supports it. So, to finally resolve our hero versus villain narrative today, here is the core takeaway you need to remember from our sources. Stop promising features by an arbitrary date. It optimizes for all the wrong things and completely traps your team. Start committing to outcomes that are backed by solid, auditable evidence. It's an absolute game changer. Which leaves us with this final, somewhat provocative question for you to reflect on. Is your current roadmap just a wish list of false promises? Or is it a true decision system that can actually show its work? If you can't trace your bets back to real evidence, it might just be time to kill the Gantt chart once and for all and build something better. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this gave you some incredibly powerful insights to take back to your team, and I will see you on the next one.